and nobody should be an arbiter at the beginning, at the outset, as to what you can talk about and what you can't. And the impulse of the Democratic Party to censor debate is part of a larger disease, which has to do with centralized control rather than democracy, and the mistrust of the people, the mistrust of the demos, which is the people, which is what democracy is named after. So they believe that the government needs to control what people hear so that they don't become infected with dangerous ideas. And, it was dangerous ideas that launched the American Revolution, an idea that people could actually govern themselves, which was considered a lie back then. And they won the revolution. And then, our nation has been about trusting people and avoiding centralized mechanics of control. And now the Democratic Party is all about the centralization of control. It's about surveillance. It's about controlling the flow of information. It's about top-down policies that are dictated by an oligarchy, and it's the opposite of democracy. And so I saw that firsthand, and I saw it in the Democratic Party alone. This is an irony. From the beginning, our polls were showing, and all the national polls were showing, or almost all of them, that I was hurting President Trump. And about 57% to 60% of the people who said they were going to vote for me said that if I left the race, they would switch their votes to Trump. So me being in the race was actually helping the Democrats. It was the Democrats who were trying to destroy my campaign, who were trying to, suit me.
Despite that.
Yeah, and it's very strange, right? Because I was helping them. Yeah. The Republican Party made no effort to keep me off the ballot. They didn't make efforts to discredit me. I mean, President Trump said, obligatory bad things about me, that I was a left-wing radical and all of this stuff, but they weren't mean-spirited things, and they weren't, there was no effort to keep me from speaking. The Democrats kept me from speaking, and their allied media outlets. When Ross Perot ran in 1992, Jordan, he was 10 months in the race, and he had 34 interviews on the mainstream media, on ABC, NBC, CNN, et cetera.
Right.
In the 18 months that I spent in the race, I had 2 live interviews.
And how long were they?
What?
How long were the interviews?
Well, they weren't long. I mean, the longest one was with Aaron Burnett, which was, I think, 22 minutes, maybe 27 minutes. Right.
So you got about 40 minutes,
interview,
maybe.
So they can't censor it. If you do a taped interview, they cut out whatever they don't want the public to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, I had 2 live interviews during 18 months compared to 34 interviews in 10 months that he had. Oh, I wasn't allowed to write letters to the editor, to the Washington Post, the New York Times, any of the mainstream, the Democratic periodicals, or publish editorials. None of them. I could not speak to that constituency. And, that's really why, I had to withdraw ultimately, and then they wouldn't let me on the debate stage.
Yeah, right.
And that was a collusion, too, because if you'd had the old debating commission, it was run by, originally for the first 15 years, my uncle had the first televised debate in 1960. And for 20 years after that, it was run by the League of Women Voters, which was independent, unbiased, and they had their own rules for letting people in. They would have let me in under their rules. And for the next, after 1980, it was run by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was also unbiased. But President Biden and President Trump said, we're not going to use the Commission on Debates. Now we're going to make a separate deal with CNN. And we now know what happened in that. The New York Times was reported in their conversations where President Biden said, we are not going to be on the stage with Robert Kennedy. So we want you to keep him off. And if you have rules that let him on, then we're not coming. And for CNN, it's tens of millions of dollars for that debate. And then they're going to get
Why did Trump agree to that?
And they're going to get hundreds of millions. Well, he went back and forth on it. So the Republicans were not entirely good on that. But he did say publicly, I think he should be on the debate.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then the same thing happened with ABC, and they adopted rules that actually I was able to reach their metrics, their thresholds, but they still kept me off the debating stage. And that's illegal. Clearly, it's illegal under FEC rules. You're not allowed to deliberately exclude another candidate from the debate without neutral rules. And you're not allowed to develop rules specifically to keep somebody off the debate. Otherwise, the debate itself becomes an illegal campaign contribution. And,
right, of course.
And that's why, Trump's lawyer, went to jail for that. Right? So what they were doing was criminal. The FEC is an anemic organization that is half of the commissioners Republican, half are Democrat. So none of them care about an independent, and so they just didn't act on it. I mean, I had, multiple discussions. I got a call from about 2 hours after President Trump's shooting in Butler. I got a call from a guy called Callie Means, who is really a genius who's been on the forefront of reforming our food system and, dealing with the chronic disease epidemic. He and his sister, Casey Means, who did this wonderful interview with Tucker that, introduced a lot of people to them. He called me and he said to me, are you interested in talking to the Trump team about, some kind of a partnership about perhaps unifying your parties? And and I said no immediately. And then I actually called my family members and talked to, a number of my immediate family members. And they said, you should talk to him. My wife said, you should talk to him, but she was not thinking about unifying the party. She was just thinking about that he had just been shot, and that, because I came from a background where my uncle, my father were killed by assassins, that it would be a compassionate thing to talk to him. But my kids were, you should talk to him about hearing him out on what he has in mind. And so I then sent Callie Means a text saying, I'm interested. And then a few minutes later, I got a three-way text from Tucker Carlson with an unknown number that was President Trump's cell phone. And he said, will you guys talk? And then I said yes. And a few minutes later, I got a call from President Trump. And we talked probably for 30 or 35 minutes. And we talked about a whole lot of issues, different issues, and, about his shooting and about the issues that I was interested in. And he expressed a kind of at that point, which was a conformance with me on some of an alignment with me on some of those issues. And we agreed to meet the next day, and we ended up meeting in Milwaukee, and we had, I think, probably about 2.5 hours together. And at that point, we talked about the food system. We talked about the chronic disease epidemic. We talked about the neocons and the addiction to war. And I was impressed by his I would say, visceral revulsion about the neocons and about their view of an imperium abroad and a national security state at home, which go hand in hand because imperialism abroad is inconsistent with democracy at home. And with also his abhorrence for censorship, which he was, again, it was visceral with him. And I think part of that is because he's seen it in action. He's been the target of censorship the same as I have. And so then we agreed that maybe there was there was grounds to meet on. They wanted me to do something at the convention, the Republican convention, and I was not ready to do anything. And then after that, I actually contacted the Harris campaign to see if she would have a conversation with me. And she just said outright no. And then
why do you think that was? I mean, you'd think a conversation
I don't know. To me, it's unimaginable that, you wouldn't have a conversation, that kind of conversation, particularly because, because the race can be so close. It's going to be within 2 or 3 points. And I had a following enough that was large enough to swing it one way or the other. And at least theoretically, so, I wouldn't.
Is it guilt by association? Is it something like that? I mean, I've had a lot of experience with Democrats who would talk to me.
Radioactive in the Democratic Party. And also they believe their own publicity. So they're all reading the New York Times and watching CNN. And if you're living in that information ecosystem, first of all, you'll never see me explain my own issues. What you'll hear is that, I'm anti-vax and that I'm anti-science and that I'm a crazy person and that I'm a lunatic and, all the other things that are just are kind of the standard defamations and perjuries about me on the Democratic controlled media or aligned media. So, and they're probably believing parts of that, and so who knows?
That might also be part of that.
I can't look into her mind and explain what they did, or why they did. I could speculate a lot, but what's the point? And I continued having conversations with the Trump campaign and with President Trump himself, in a number of personal conversations. And I ended up going to Mar-a-Lago with Amaryllis, my daughter-in-law, who runs my campaign. And we sat down with Don Jr. and with President Trump and Susie Wiles' campaign manager for several hours and talked through these issues. And we agreed to do a unity campaign where we would, like they have in Europe, where there are, there's coalitions where you don't give up your own independence or your capacity to criticize your allies on things with which you don't agree with them. And he was very agreeable to that, and on the issues that we don't agree on, that I would continue to criticize him and he could criticize me without penalty, and to our alliance, and that the issues that we did agree on, he agreed to make them priorities and to involve me in some way in helping to choose the new government and helping to give emphasis to the policies that I was concerned about. And the 3 policies were children's health and the chronic disease epidemic, and which involves the food system and getting the corruption out of the public health agencies and out of USDA. Second, to ending the censorship and surveillance. And number 3, ending the warfare state, ending the Ukraine war immediately. And all of those are issues that he
those are big issues,
had come to on his own, and that I think he appreciated my insights on some of those issues and my passion for some of those issues and my knowledge about some of those issues and expertise. And he welcomed me, my involvement. I mean, one of the things you asked me about what I sort of had come to discover about President Trump, and he said to me a number of things that were very illuminating. One is that he and Donald Jr. And J.D. Vance were absolutely had extraordinary antipathy toward what the neocons have done to our country. I was surprised about that, how knowledgeable they were and how passionate. And J.D. Vance is a soldier, and so his understanding of the neocons comes out of his own service abroad and his own military service. And then Donald Trump Jr., I don't know exactly how he came to his antagonism toward them, but it's very, very heartfelt. That gave me a lot of confidence as well, that he's surrounded by people who are close to him, that are in his family, and that are gonna be involved in his administration, who agreed with me. And we talked at that time about, in fact, it was an issue that I brought up about bringing Tulsi onto the team, and they were very, very welcoming of that idea. And that, of course,
another one who had tremendous trouble with the Democrats.
Not only, and she was the deputy director of the Democratic National Committee, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, she was a core, Democrat and a Democratic presidential candidate, Democratic congresswoman.
A formidable figure.
Yeah, and very, very formidable. And somebody that I like personally a lot and have had a long and very, very friendly relationship with. And then, but he also said something to me. He said, last time that I was in 2016, he said, we got elected, and he said, we didn't really expect that was going to happen. And,
right. Obviously.
And I was not prepared for it.
Yeah.
And he said, we launched the transition committee in January. And I was immediately surrounded by, business people and lobbyists and saying, you pick this guy, pick that guy, pick that guy. And he said, and I did it. I did what they said. He said, I later came to regret it. And a lot of those people were bad people. Like, how he talks about that. He said they were bad people.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to do that this time. I want to do something completely different. And he said, we're going to launch a transition committee starting this week. So normally the transition committee is paid for by the GAO, by the General Accounting Office. And you don't launch till after the election. But with him, he got private donors to pay for the transition committee, and he's starting it 4 or 5 months early, so that they can actually put a government in place. And then another thing he said is, one of the big complaints against President Trump has been that he's sort of a captive of the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. And he said to me, Project 2025, they keep trying to stick that to me. And I've never read it. I never heard it. I heard of it until people started telling me that I was behind it. And he said, that was written by a right-wing asshole. This is what he said to me. And he said, there are left-wing assholes and there are right-wing assholes. And that was written by a right-wing asshole. And so in that way, he kind of, disavowed this kind of ideological pigeonhole that they're trying to put him in. And I think his administration is going to be really interesting because, like you said, he's surrounded by people who are entrepreneurial, who really are common sense people who want to do the right thing for our country. And, I also came to understand President Trump in a different light. And it's easy for me to understand because I've been vilified and demonized by the press and the view of me, across the kind of the liberal landscapes is that, I'm this really insane, crazy person. And but a lot of people, I take that as gospel, as reality. And, I think a lot of the things that have been said about President Trump are the same thing. They're things that are propaganda tropes. They're very simplistic characterizations of him that miss some of the richness of his character and of his personality.